Hello everyone, welcome to 2 in 22, where we provide 2 insights on go-to-market success in just 22 minutes. I'm the host of the show, Gary Schwacke. Each and every week I host a conversation with an experienced professional who shares 2 insights and the stories behind them that they feel are critical to go-to-market success for growth companies. We will hear from executives and private equity investors with a variety of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives. These professionals are working towards exceptional things with real-world constraints and challenges, just like you. If you are tired of marketing and sales hacking and want an authentic, practical guidance on go-to-market success, then this is the show for you. If you can't stick around for the live show, you can get recordings and highlights of all shows by subscribing to the review on our website, 2in22.com. Now, let's jump right into the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of 2 in 22. We are very excited to have my friend Saul Garcia on the show. Without delay, introduce Saul. So this is going to be great. I love this background because we've talked a lot at Yield about revenue operations, and it's a relatively new role. You hear a lot about it being incorporated into sales operations, marketing operations, but for us, it's really the command and control center of understanding what's happening in the revenue engine, the revenue processing cycle, if you will. And Saul brings a ton of experience with both private equity, growth equity, and venture-backed companies. Starting prior to this, of course, but Active Network, which was backed by Vista Equity, a prolific investor in software and well-known for its standard operating procedures, a big component of which is revenue operations. And then Aventree was an event management platform growing nicely, and he was brought on to actually build out the revenue ops function there, as well as then at Rocket Trip, which was a GV-backed company, and is now the director of revenue operations at Health Recovery Solutions. And so I think we're going to learn a lot here today and chatting with Saul. So without further delay, let's bring him in and have our conversation. Hello, Saul. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Gary. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you. All right. So I think it's becoming, I won't say common, but you're starting to see this thread of revenue operations. But I would guess even back in the active days when it was sales operations, that it was still sales operations and marketing operations. So talk a little bit about the evolution as you've seen it in a relatively short period of time, so over the last 5 years or so, and then your journey and thread through that.
Sure. So yeah, to touch base on sort of, I guess, the journey of sales operations as a whole. Sales operations is definitely still somewhat relatively new. I will come across people who have been in sales operations for 15, 20 years, but I think it's still relatively new considering, kind of where it's at in the marketplace. So I think 5 years ago, you definitely saw more sales operations and marketing operations. Those were two, fairly standard functions with regards to, any organization that's in the SaaS industry. Right. I think what we've started to see over the past few years is sort of an evolution, which I think aligns with just an evolution with regards to sales and marketing as well. But it's an evolution where now it's sort of, instead of being siloed and separated, it's being brought together by this sort of new paradigm shift, which would be revenue operations. I would say revenue operations has really kind of grown in the past 2 or 3 years. And even what's kind of interesting is you're starting to see other branches such as commercial operations or growth operations, which is interesting to see where that might go in the future. But right. I do think revenue operations, I've seen a few different kind of articles and sort of research papers that show how revenue operations is one of the fastest growing titles on LinkedIn, as well as, other titles such as Chief Revenue Officer and things like that.
Right. So just a question there. So we have listeners and clients that are across the spectrum in terms of industries. it seems to me that revenue operations is one of those things that's probably now generally accepted in the software and technology space, which makes a ton of sense because so many of the touch points are digital. Are you seeing it spill into other aspects? And I guess let's just broadly define what we think revenue operations is today. You know,
Sure.
what does it encompass? What are the functions? What are the kind of core components of value that it delivers to the organization?
Yeah, so that's always a hot topic as well. I find that the definition sort of evolves, I think, almost every year, and I think those of us in the revenue operations circle always, find some fun in that because we seem to, it seems to increase. We seem to gain more responsibility every year. Mostly, I would say that the teams that you directly support in revenue operations are generally speaking going to be sales, marketing, and customer success. I think secondary to that, finance and accounting. You always closely work with finance and accounting when in revenue operations. So I generally will say it's those four. And then I think, I think generally what I guess defining the work that revenue operations does, it's sales enablement, sales and marketing enablement. You will manage the tech stack for all functions and teams that you support. So you will manage the marketing tech, the sales tech, the customer success tech, and then support in some way or another, usually the finance tech via integrations and things like that. Data and insights, right? I think before data and insights, you build processes though. The processes, I think, support your data or create the data for you. So you help to create standard processes that will allow for your teams to scale, to then be able to have data where you can make informed decisions and predict future results, right? So those are generally the areas that I would say that revenue operations is involved in. Obviously, tech stack is a huge part of it. Marketing automation, CRM, et cetera, are usually sort of where I think the foundation is, but there's obviously a lot of other tools outside of that also involve.
I loved your point about developing a process first, which is inherently actually creating the data model upon which you can actually analyze. That's a great point. So let's jump into your two insights for go-to-market success. What would those be?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is, and I sort of already alluded to this, I think there's putting a lot of emphasis and the value and the alignment between sales and marketing. I think naturally that's where a lot of sales and marketing teams are starting to move towards. But having one team, one revenue team, and that's obviously where you, like I said, you sort of see the chief revenue officer title start to be more prevalent on job boards. You also start to see revenue operations be a little bit more prevalent on job boards. So that would sort of be my first topic. I think secondary to that, obviously with regards to revenue operations, it's when do you invest in revenue operations? I think it's important to invest early. And then I think, there's obviously some correlation as to how that sort of defines the sales and marketing relationship as well. So those I would say are the two topics for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. What hits me with those two is it's one begets the other, and it's kind of the chicken and the egg, right? It's like where do you start? Because you can talk all day long about alignment, and that's kind of the buzzword, and everybody says, well, you just need to do it. Well, that's part easier said than done when you've got different metrics of success and things like that. And there's ultimately what it comes down to is you get what you measure. And you measure it when you have an entity, a group, professionals that can actually do that. So talk a little bit about how you mentioned the process piece, which I think is really interesting, as a way to actually bring that alignment as you're thinking through the funnel. Because I think that's one of the things we see a lot is that when we're working with growth companies, is that there's a knee-jerk reaction to invest in either marketing or in sales, rarely at the same time. And so, but the reality is you probably need to move, 3 or 4 steps down the road with marketing. At the same time, you're moving a step or two down with sales. And if one gets too far ahead of the other, then you lack that alignment and you don't produce the results that you want. And you're misinvesting, you're capital inefficient. So, I mean, you've got a unique experience that you were brought in to help build out this function, and would love to hear about, the build of that process, how that translates into the data model, and how you start to create the flywheel with that.
Yeah, so I think generally where I start is I sort of ask the question of where do we want to measure and what do we want to measure. I generally find, and my background sort of started off in reporting and analytics within sales operations, so that might just be based on my personal bias and sort of what what helped build and mold me in revenue operations. But right. I do sort of start off with that. I generally will ask the question, so what do we want to report on? I think when it comes to aligning goals, what I tend to find from a marketing and sales perspective is that marketing is measured on one thing and sales is measured on another. Sales is generally measured on bookings and or revenue, and marketing is at times generally measured on leads and MQLs and website traffic and things like that, where I think what brings the alignment together at the very, very top is having one common goal, which is whether it's bookings, whether it's revenue, whatever it may be, by having both sales and marketing measured off of bookings and or revenue. Because I think from there, then you can sort of start to peel the layers back and sort of understand the process that requires you to get there. That truthfully is probably one of the most difficult things. And truthfully, it's one of the things that we're going through actively right now here at Health Recovery Solutions, is trying to build that process so that we're all measured within the same areas, having some sort of an SLA between sales and marketing to agree on how are we actually defining a lead, right? What's our operational definition for a lead, operational definition for an MQL, SAL, all the way down the funnel. Once you build that process out, then going back to what we talked about before, then you're able to sort of measure those KPIs. But ultimately, as long as it all starts with what is our combined revenue and or bookings goal and target, and we go from there, that's, I think, where you start to really see the alignment working out really well. As you mentioned, there's that age-old, I guess, finger pointing that goes along with sales and marketing, which is marketing really wants sales to follow up on their leads. Sales will say the leads aren't good enough, and then and so if we're both working towards the same goal, then it makes it a little bit easier to sort of, I think, work around some of those things.
Sure, yeah, and a little bit of that healthy tension is fine, but it can be debilitating quickly. So in the different businesses, I can see how where it would seem to get really complex is when you have a very long sales cycle and the number of touch points required, and marketing needs some leading indicators to make sure that what they're doing is pushing things in the right direction. And they may take 6, 9, 12 months to reveal themselves in actual bookings or revenue. So you've worked in organizations that have, both relatively short, call it 30, 60, 90 days, where you take an activity and something turns into a booking, and others that are longer term. Where have you seen that? How have you seen teams manage through those differing sales cycles in terms of some of the early access signals to let them know they're in the right direction?
Yeah, I think, and just to confirm, I think what you're asking is the indicators for success for marketing.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot different in a more transactional model versus an enterprise model. I would say that it's, in my experience, a little bit easier on the transactional side, right? It's much more straightforward. You can have and see direct results with regards to your marketing attribution. A shorter sales cycle will allow you to say this actually influenced this, right? With a fair amount of certainty. When it comes to like enterprise level deals, anything that's our sales cycle can be anywhere from 200-300 days and so forth. Now you're looking at a lot of different activity within that specific deal, and I think in an enterprise deal as a whole, you're also generally going to have more people involved in the deal. So marketing attribution is key, and that's also another thing that we're currently working through. It's for me, it's a puzzle. It's a really fun puzzle to try to solve. But I think marketing attribution is extremely important. Regarding an enterprise deal, it does get very complex. From an operational perspective, making sure from the top level that all your forms or submission forms, blog subscriptions, whatever it may be, is tying into your marketing automation tool and being tagged correctly into your CRM. So all activities are being tracked throughout the entire life cycle, right? Doing so from an operational perspective is fairly taxing. You want to make sure, especially when you come into a new org and it hasn't really been set up correctly and or hasn't just been set up at all, you have to do an initial huge audit to make sure that everything is sort of up to date. From there, then you want to make sure that your model within your CRM is able to calculate that attribution. I think overall, like I said, it's certainly a fairly complex system, but once you get it right, it's really rewarding to then be able to say, whatever your sort of formula is for marketing attribution, if you put a little bit more weight towards any activity that happens in the middle and the early and the end, I think it can be different for each industry or each organization. It's extremely important to look at those with a lot of detail, to not only look at the deals that you've lost, or the deals that you've won, but also the deals that you've lost. But yeah, it's a huge puzzle. It really is. But it's something that I really enjoy trying to solve. And like I said, we're actively doing that right now. So it's pretty fun.
So believe it or not, we've got about 6 minutes left. I told you it was going to go fast.
Yes, it does.
So you talked about the investing early in revenue operations. And I think that is probably the biggest challenge for a lot of companies, because it's probably easy, one of those things that just kicks down the road. And we couldn't agree more. I mean, when you have a well-functioning business intelligence layer that's across the revenue engine, it is amazing what you can accomplish. But it's not for the faint of heart, right? It takes a lot of work. You talked about building the data model and attribution. And I mean, it takes a lot of time and energy to build that out. So based on your experience, what have you seen as a time, whether it's the size of the sales organization, the size of the company, that is the right time to really think about investing into that? And then where does one start? Like, what are the building blocks to build up to a high-performing RevOps org?
Yeah, and I'll try to answer that in the remaining time as much as I can. That's a challenge in itself. But I think, I think to answer it quickly, I think as soon as possible. And I think you'll see a lot of that out there. A lot of people now are sort of on the boat of, when you hire your VP of sales, you also hire your head of revenue operations. Yeah. It can get much more complex when you're trying to think about how quickly you're scaling or growing. What are you looking for? Are you looking for someone that's more technical, someone that's more strategic? That can really kind of start to complicate sort of the search, I guess you could say. But I think, to answer that as easily as possible, it's as quick as you can hire. Because ultimately, I say this about revenue operations, we are the nerdy side of sales and marketing and customer success. And truthfully, we get to do the things that I think generally heads of marketing and sales just don't have the time to do, right? We really build out a lot of these processes. We can help validate a lot of the data that you're trying to look at. And instead of spending 2-3 days going through various Excel sheets, we can do that for you, and or build those reports out for you. And I think it's extremely important, especially if you're going through a diligence process and or you're looking to get an additional round of funding. That revenue operations is extremely helpful in those situations. I think as soon as you can, and then I think when you're looking at what type and or when or how you build it out, I think what's really important, and I think this gets overlooked a lot of times, people are starting to, in the past, heads of sales operations were hired as one individual. I think because sales operations has sort of evolved into revenue operations, people are also thinking, I just need to hire one person for revenue operations. However, sales operations, maybe that was doable because it's just sales ops. But if revenue operations is supporting 3-4 different areas, you really do need to start not just investing in a leader in revenue operations to head that team, but start thinking about additional headcount. Do you want a CRM administrator? Do you want a marketing automation manager? Do you want a specialist? Do you want a sales enablement, someone who's going to help with the training aspect? So yeah, I think those are all things that someone or an organization should consider fairly early on.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. It's pretty consistent with just a few weeks ago we had Chris Davey from Riverside Company on. Riverside's a private equity investor, and it was the same kind of thing. It's like as soon as you start thinking about bringing that layer of sales management, if you don't, they won't even bring in sales management until they have some form of sales, at least sales ops, if not revenue.
Right.
Because they know that person, A, they won't get the talent they need if you don't have it, and B, they'll be flying blind and burning a lot of time and energy just trying to get to information. So we're with you, my brother. We're huge fans of the data geek world, and quite frankly, that's where the power lives, because that's what enables the alignment, and it's all about delivering revenue in a capital efficient manner.
Absolutely.
So that's critically important. So as you think about, we talked a little bit about, we got a couple of minutes here, but so that first process standpoint, so you come into a new organization, maybe it's even Health Recovery Solutions, and you're thinking about, you've got the various tool sets, probably a lot of which there's stuff that's already there, right?
Sure.
What is the kind of the go-to thing that you've seen that helps you just survey the land? Like, is there a playbook or a framework or a spreadsheet or a cheat sheet or something you go together and like, I'm just go through an inventory of these things so that I know where to start?
Yeah, I think it's what I alluded to before, which is I will ask, what are you reporting on, right? Give me the reports that you're currently using. I will sort of survey those reports to understand what they're trying to report on or what they're looking for, and then I'll ask, what is this report trying to report on or trying to display? And a lot of the times what they will say they want out of the report is not what that report is displaying.
Yeah,
so that's my method. And again, I think it has to do with
what you think you're looking at. Let me tell you what you're actually looking at. Yeah.
Exactly. And that happens more often than not early on. So I think, that's my method. My method is start with the reporting, because that's where you sort of get to understand what people really want out of the data, right? I want a bookings report that says this, or a pipeline report that tells me early indications of this, or whatever that may be. And a lot of the times they're just not accurate. So that's my method, Al. And that's when I start to find the holes. And then that's where I start to build a process to try to get to where we want to from a data perspective. So then we can start to have some early wins to understand how to make some informed business decisions. And then I think it's sort of a cycle of that just keeps happening. Okay, so now that we've solved this is an easy win. Now we can start sort of taking bigger steps. So that's my method of the madness. I don't have a particular cheat sheet or anything, but for me, it's all based on sort of my foundation of reporting.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant, right? Start with what actually matters to the business and work backwards from there. So that's great. All right, excellent. All right, so fantastic conversation. I told you it was going to go fast. But we got a lot of content packed into this 2 minutes. So again, just for posterity's sake, Saul's 2 insights for go-to-market success are alignment of sales and marketing. And then what I love about this next one, invest early in revenue operations, is that is the accelerator to making that alignment happen. So fantastic points from Saul. So Saul, thank you for taking the time, sharing your wisdom, and we really appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you so much, Gary. It was a pleasure to get to do this with you, and looking forward to connecting more in the future.
Sounds good. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Saul. Well, that was wonderful. We are obviously revenue operations and all that it entails is near and dear to our hearts. So it was great to geek out with a fellow revenue ops person there. But really, as we think about go-to-market success, it's all about knowing where you're going, and you need solid measurement to be able to do that. So thank you to Saul, and we look forward to catching you next week. Remember, you can go to 2in22.com to subscribe for recordings if you weren't able to catch the whole thing, and we'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Life is moving fast, so if you missed the live show of 2 in 22, you can get the video recording and highlights by subscribing at 2in22.com. You can also get the audio version by subscribing to the 2 in 22 podcast on your favorite platform. Thanks for spending time with us.